Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt and welcome to the Brick Workshop. Now, a lot of people have asked me about how I got into woodworking, and many have asked about what Festool kit I've got, and really the general questions have been about my woodworking journey. So this video is a little bit about my woodworking journey, but also about my Festool story. So where do I begin? Well, it all started when I was about 6 years old. My father, who was an accomplished woodworker, he was actually an engineer, gave me a hammer and a 6-inch nail, a lump of wood, and he said, off you go. And so I made a radio. Well, it wasn't really a radio, but as I grew a little bit older, I became a sort of an apprentice to my father. And one of the things he used to get me to do was he'd put a pencil mark on a piece of wood and he'd say, right, now cut that square. And I'd use a panel saw, the old-fashioned sort of saw, and do my best. And he would get his square, and this is it. And he would check it and he'd say, no. Do that again, he'd put another pencil mark, and off I'd go. And eventually I got reasonably good. But unfortunately, when Dad died and I got hold of this square, I checked it. It was miles out. Poor old Dad. Never mind. But it got me into the thing of trying my very best to get things right. And that's really what is behind everything I do, and trying my best. And really what is behind everything I do on YouTube is to encourage people to have a go. Don't worry if you make a bishop, just have a go. And even though I had a proper day job, I did do my very best to make furniture for the house, and we actually built our own house a long time ago, and that was no mean feat. And you had to learn to do so many different things. And I learned by getting books from the library, bought the odd book, and I asked professional tradesmen for advice and help. And it really does pay off not to be afraid to have a go. But enough of that, but let me jump forward many years later, and I really wanted to concentrate on my woodwork. Anyway, by the time I retired from my day job, I had accrued a reasonable amount of fairly heavy machinery. Well, I say heavy machinery, it wasn't industrial or professional workshop grade machinery, but it was still pretty big stuff. I had a table saw, a spindle moulder, and a mortising machine, plus the normal sort of mixture of routers and hammers, and I also had a radial arm saw, and more of that in a second. Now, there's that adage that a bad workman blames his tools. Well, to an extent that's true, but I'd turn that saying upside down and say if you've got really good tools, it does help, and that was been the case for me. So these tools I had were a mixture of relatively poor performing tools. I had various other bits of kit, but all cheap and cheerful. And I was driven to wanting to improve the squareness of my cuts, and I couldn't get my radial arm saw adjusted properly. I would adjust it one day and it'd be out the next, and so on and so forth. So I decided, right, I'm going to get rid of all the big machinery and I'm going to make a complete change. And first of all, top of my list, I wanted a miter saw. So I put the old tools on the market, and they actually made a tidy sum of money. I was very pleased with that. And so I then spent 3 months, and I remember that 3 months very well because I did no woodwork whatsoever, and all I did was working outside with a concrete mixer and a shovel. But anyway, in those 3 months, I did a lot of internet searches, which a long time ago in 2010, that wasn't as easy as it is today because things were very slow. And in those searches, I discovered Festool. Really, I thought, gosh, this is too expensive for me. But then I joined a thing called the Festool Owners Group, or the FOG. And the FOG is a forum where people discuss problems, and you can go into little sort of threads and read about people's experiences or questions they're asking, and so on and so forth. And on the FOG was a particular person. His name was poor Marcel. And poor Marcel is probably the guy I would blame for getting me into Festool, because he made videos, he demonstrated Festool kit, and it was quite clear to me that he was being very honest about what he was saying, and it was also crystal clear that the Festool kit was pretty good. So thanks to Paul, I bit the bullet. It wasn't really so difficult, and I went to Axminster Tools and Machinery, and I bought my first bunch of Festool kit, and it was a lot of money. And I accept that people will think, oh, Festool, it's expensive. But it is. But all of this kit I've still got today, and that's 12, almost 13 years later. And the one thing I was trying to replace, if you remember, was my old radial arm saw, and I bought the Capex 120. It's still here. It's still working perfectly today. It's never gone wrong. The only thing I've had to do is have the blades sharpened from time to time, and that's it. Absolutely brilliant. And my other purchases included a Domino machine, an MFT3, the CT26 Extractor, a Rotex 90 sander, the OF 1400 router, which is in my little router table, so I can't show it you directly, and a CXS. And probably the next most significant thing to the capex was the TS55 saw, because that gave me the ability to cut sheet goods really accurately. Now, in my search for an extractor, there was one key thing that I needed, and this was another element that drew me to Festool, but it wasn't the absolute element. But I wanted an extractor which would automatically start and stop as you used the tool which was plugged into it. And of course my CT26, and I think every other Festool vacuum extractor has this ability. You plug the tool in, and when you power up the tool, off it goes. And for those cordless tools nowadays, of course, there's Bluetooth, which does all that stuff automatically without an attached cable. So that was important to me. Now, I have borrowed quite a lot of Festool kit from professional friends of mine, in particular my friend David. And if you're one of those people who've lent me a tool, thank you very much indeed. And in those early days, I really got to know Festool kit reasonably well, even though I had just a relatively small selection of it. I wanted to build a bench. It actually wasn't this one. It was a much bigger, heavier bench. And I knew that it had to be pretty sturdy to take all the sort of planing and hammering and all the things that goes on benches. So I determined that I wanted to borrow a Domino 700. And then I know I had the Domino 500, but I wanted the big Domino so I could make some pretty strong joints to hold the frame of the bench together. I actually approached Festool and said, would you lend me one? I don't even know if they replied, but certainly if they did, it was negative. But I contacted a chap in Woking, Warren Smith, and he runs Toolfest. And he really, really kindly let me borrow a DF 700 demo machine, which they had. And I built the bench, and as a result of that, I decided as a sort of return gesture to Warren that I would write an article for Woodworking magazine, which is not particularly difficult to do. But then I thought, well, I could make a video, and I'd never made a video before. So I made a video about the Domino 700. And when it was done, I returned the machine in person to Warren to thank him. And he was really chuffed, and he told me that Festool UK were actually quite chuffed with the video that I made. In fact, I think it was 3 videos altogether about that machine. So that was a nice start. So that's the second person I've mentioned. So if Paul Marcel or Warren Smith are looking at this video, both of you, thank you very much indeed. And after the success of that first video, I decided to make more videos about the tools that I'd already bought from Axminster, and some of them are behind me. And you recall I'm a member of the Festool owners group, the FOG, and so I was putting the videos up there as well as on YouTube. Subsequently, I was invited first of all to Festool UK on a sort of open day thing, which was really, really good. It was very professionally done, and although it was only a day, I learned a huge amount more about Festool than I thought I already knew. And then several years later, I was lucky enough to be invited to Festool in Germany. And again, it was a event for bloggers, YouTubers, people like me. And it was held over a couple of days, and it was absolutely brilliant. Not only did we get to meet a lot of the people sort of behind the scenes, and they're all terribly nice, very professional, but we also got to see the factory where things were being made. And again, that was absolutely an eye-opener, just how much effort and attention to detail goes into things. But then talking about the attention to detail, their testing area was astonishing. The tools would be dropped from a height onto a hard floor. They'd be subject to humidity in a sort of misting environment, and they'd be certainly abused and checked to make sure they still functioned, and any defects were then corrected at the design stage again. And they also had people who were using the tools all the time just to make sure they functioned as they were designed to do. And that was all very illuminating. One of the things that I realised about watching other people's videos about tools is that it's better not to make a review, it's better to do a demonstration of the tool that illustrates its capabilities and perhaps its shortcomings. Rather than doing a review where you say, well, this is rubbish because of so-and-so. That's very much a subjective view made by the reviewer. And I think it's far better to take the tool through its paces and let other people make up their own minds whether it suits them. Because anything a reviewer says may be seen differently by a professional carpenter or professional woodworker or professional cabinet maker, or by a hobbyist working in the shed at the bottom of the garden. So that's why I try to do demonstrations and not reviews. And the key thing to remember is I've never been paid to make any videos whatsoever. And I hope the way that I present things gives you an honest view of the various bits of kit that I'm demonstrating. Now, I know that if I don't say what I'm about to say, the first couple of comments on this video will be, have you ever regretted buying anything? And has anything ever gone wrong? Well, let's tackle the first one. One of the things that I found to be really important at the beginning was the Festool MFT3. It was the workbench with lots of holes in, and it really did seem to be a good idea because it was integrated with the track saw. There was a track that came down, fitted onto it, and so on and so forth. But I've decided subsequently it was not accurate enough for me. It would go out of square every now and again, and so on and so forth. It's a very useful bench. It's a really, really useful concept, having a workbench with holes in. So much so that I have a track saw cutting station which I've created myself. And so this, in a sense, is like a giant MFT3. So that's my only regret, but at the time it was extremely useful. Has anything ever gone wrong? Two things. First of all, my little CXS, it needed new brushes. It was within the warranty period, sent it off, came back. To be honest, I can't remember how long it took. I think it took about 5, it might have been 10 days, I can't remember. And it came back fixed, no charge. And then recently, my absolutely best friend, as far as sanders go, the ETS EC150/3. One day, not so long ago, it stopped working, and I couldn't see why. It was certainly not the cable, etc., etc. So I went online, Festool UK website, and I booked it in. I got a ticket number, etc., and a label to go on a parcel. I parcelled it up, stuck the label on, and I took it to one of these pickup points. It could, if I had ticked the right box, had it picked up from the house. And that was on a Friday, and the following Friday, 7 days later, it came back, and it's absolutely perfect. It's still got all the bash marks from where I've dropped it many times, etc., but it works perfectly. So those are those two things, regrets and repairs. Well, maybe that appeared to be a bit of a downside. No, not at all. Now, the key thing about Festool kit is that it's part of a family. So therefore, if you buy one tool, parts of another tool will fit it. If you get an extractor, it will fit all the tools, and so it goes on. So it's a family of tools, and that's really important. Now, I've often been asked about my sort of must-have list of Festool kit. Let's start at the very top, and the first thing is an extractor. Festool extractors are brilliant. I've had my CT26 since the very beginning. It's never gone wrong. I've changed the bags, of course, and so on and so forth, but it's absolutely brilliant. And the Festool kit, part of a family, the extractor will fit all the tools, and so it is an absolute must. Let me say to you, the one tool that has changed my woodworking life is the Domino machine. The Domino 500 is in my first set of purchases. I've used it all that time. It's never gone wrong. It's been dropped. I don't know if you can see the scar here. It's been dropped a number of times from a reasonable height. In fact, I nearly dropped it then. Now, I was building a barn and I was using my old mortiser, and I had to move the machine around in the workshop so I had pieces of wood sticking out of the window or out of the door to do the mortises. If I'd had then the access to the DF700 Domino, I could have taken the tool to the work, then it would have been much easier. But the fact that I can do mortise and tenons effectively, floating tenons, with a Domino is absolutely brilliant. And you only have to see my recent video about the hall table to understand that. So the Domino, really important machine. The next on my list is a track saw. With the track saw you can break down sheet goods, you can create a track saw cutting station, whatever it might be, use the MFD3 and you can cut up smaller bits very easily. Capex is important to me. It was one of the key things that drew me towards Festool in the first place. And the cuts you get when you cut something with the Capex, you don't need to sand it, you don't need to do anything. You certainly don't need to plane it. It is absolutely as smooth as anything. So Capex, very important. I think I may have said earlier just how much I love my ETS EC 150/3. And if I was just going to buy one sander, this would be it. It is astonishing. I know it's not cheap, but you can put 60 grit or 80 grit in this and take rough sawn oak and make a bit of rustic furniture with it. You can put 180 grit or 240 grit in this and finish off that lovely piece of woodwork that's going to be an heirloom. So it's so versatile, it's fantastic. So that's a really important sander. My original sander was the Rotex 90. I've still got it, never gone wrong, of course. And so that's got the three functions. Also, it's got the delta function as well, which is pretty important. So that if you want one universal sander, maybe that one might appeal to you a little more. And whichever sander you get, go for the granite paper because it is super. It doesn't clog very much at all, and it really does last a long time. So what about the kit that you want to get after that initial set? You slowly build up over the years. Well, it does really depend on your requirements, but certainly drill drivers are important, and the Festool drill drivers are super. And the little CXS I use so much, and the great advantage of the CXS in its kit, it's got everything, including the angle adapter, a chuck, and so on and so forth. So that's really good. Now the next most important thing is a router, and before I started buying into Festool, I reckon I've probably gone through 8, maybe 10 routers. Some of them didn't last very long, some of them just weren't very good. They were really cheap. But when I got hold of my OF1010, which is the baby router, which I'd really recommend if you're going to buy a router, get that one first. It's the small router. It's either got a 1/4 inch or 8mm chuck, no bigger, but I use it 80% of the time. If you want a bigger chuck, then you need to go for the OF1400 or the OF2200. The OF2200 is very much the professional router. Beautiful machine, I've used it several times. Now if you're a professional, depending on what you do, you might need an impact driver, a drywall screwdriver, hammer drill, whatever it might be. Well, that's something that you would have to work out for yourself. Now look, I'm well retired. I've had a long time to accrue all the tools I've got. So be patient, get the best tools that you can afford at the time, and remember that Rome wasn't built in a day. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.